Martin Popoff from the Contrarians back again with another edition of Who Invented Heavy Metal. As I've explained, I've always wanted this series to be album centric. So every episode is going to be based on an album, except we are going to fill in the gaps early on because I've been getting a lot of comments about people saying, "Oh, what about this? What about this? What about this?" So this is going to be officially the second episode if you wanted to put them all in line chronologically. The first episode was called Who Invented Heavy Metal, 1250 BC to 1895 AD. This episode is going to be called Who Invented Heavy Metal, 1900 to 1950. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go through, because these are all bits and pieces. Obviously, you've got to take this with a bit of a grain of salt. But what I'm going to do, as I did with the first episode, is I'm just going to race through these years in my book, Who Invented Heavy Metal, which is still available, martinpopoff.com. But this is, a big wordy book that ends in 1971, and it has entries for these things. It's kind of like a timeline and quotes book. So I'm just going to go through what we've got in the book that covers that 50-year period here. So here we go. So October 10th, 1902, Orville Gibson incorporates his company as Gibson Mandolin Guitar Manufacturing Company Limited. So there you go. We've got Gibson coming. Gibson obviously is going to be a big part of the heavy metal story. 1903, Bela Bartok, 1881-1945, recognized here for his contribution to dissonance. In 1903, he wrote his first major orchestral work, Kossuth, which sounds very heavy metal, but dissonance is a big part of heavy metal history. Remember, in the last episode, we had the whole treatise on the Devil's Note, the tritone, the Diabolus in Musica, but dissonance is a big deal too, because that is a dissonant kind of idea. And then obviously, as metal gets more and more extreme, it's a big part of it. 1914 to 1916, Gustav Holst's The Planets, a 7-movement orchestral suite, heavy grinding, including Mars, Bringer of War, and influence on Black Sabbath, and quoted by Led Zeppelin and Diamond Head, but first and most literally by Pre-Atomic Rooster Band Andromeda on Return to Sanity from their quite heavy 1969 self-titled debut. Geezer Butler was a medium-sized fan of the Planet Suite and has brought a melody from this to Tony, who switched a few notes around, and the song Black Sabbath was born. So very, very important song, obviously, in heavy metal history, Black Sabbath. I get that complaint all the time too, because I haven't arrived yet, as I'm doing this, at the Black Sabbath album, which I call the first heavy metal album. Everything else is proto that we've talked about. So people are always chiming in, no, man, Black Sabbath invented it. I know, we're getting there, right? Okay, but now we're really early still. So 1928. Frank Stokes, lesser known unheralded bluesman who doesn't get the credit that Robert Johnson does, but is earlier with essentially the same kind of music. We're going to talk about some of these early blues guys, but there's been Andy Edwards, who's done some great stuff on the origins of heavy metal, talks about a whole bunch of other blues sort of parts of this story as we go on. And I think I've seen in the comments some other blues people mentioned that I don't mention coming up that we're going to be seeing. But yes, rock and roll is born from the blues. Heavy metal is born from rock and roll. But as I've always said, I really feel that heavy metal is invented truly and perfectly along, with Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, when the blues is mercilessly excised from the music and it's kind of replaced with classical. That's kind of the idea, right? Okay, and then there's a big long quote here I got from John Mayall. And then let's see, September 17th, 1931, RCA unveils the first 33 1/3 RPM LP record players, symbolizing the birth of album rock, so heavy metal bands can make money too. So yeah, some of these entries are a little facetious, right? Because, heavy metal is not a singles thing, and so we get the invention of the LP right here, right? 1932, Beauchamp, Barth, and Rickenbacker, otherwise known as the Ropat Corporation, create the first electric guitars, the Frying Pan and the Electric Spanish. This all happens in Los Angeles to a soundtrack of Hawaiian music and lap steel. 1932, Hal Roach movie Asleep at the Wheel includes the phrase rock and roll, while 2 years later, the Boswell sisters have a #7 hit song called Rock and Roll. If anything, it is the sisters' hit from 1931 called Shout Sister Shout that includes an inkling of the rock and roll genre to come with its rapid fire vocals and talk of Satan. Okay, so we've got Satan coming in. We've got the birth of rock and roll. Again, generally speaking, rock and roll is like a very specific part of the blues rule book that is that sort of takes flight and is fleshed out more and sped up. That's a big important part of it, right? Okay, 1933, pianist Peter DeRose writes the song Deep Purple. Legend has it that it was Ritchie Blackmore's grandmother's favorite song and that she often used to ask Ritchie to play it for her on guitar. 1934, Ro-Pat-In is renamed the Electro String Instrument Corporation, and one of their new models is called a Rickenbacker. 1934 also, Loren Hammond invents the Hammond organ. The Hammond organ company sells its first model, the Model A, in June the following year. Keyboards were an integral part of early heavy metal, prominent in the works of Deep Purple. John Lord played a C3, as did Keith Emerson. Uriah Heep and Atomic Rooster. The Hammond sound was the heaviest keyboard sound available and allowed keyboards a place in the electric mud that is metal. So yeah, keyboards isn't a huge part of heavy metal. Famously, Ronnie James Dio always was ambivalent about having keyboard players in his band or having them play too much, kind of thing. So yeah, keyboards, but still, it's a big part of that birth part of heavy metal, right? 1935, the Model B electric Spanish is the first solid body electric guitar, suggesting more relevance or reliance on electricity to get the job done over acoustic vibration and resonance. 1936 to 1937, these are essentially the recording years of Robert Johnson, who is said to have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, but more importantly, influenced many future guitar players. So he's selling his soul at the crossroads. We've got Paganini, the legend of him, big Yngwie Malmsteen influence that we talked about in the previous episode. 1938, LSD was first synthesized by Albert Hoffman from ergot, a grain fungus that typically grows on rye. So, it's kind of important, right? Drugs, the Beatles experiment with drugs. We get LSD begets acid rock, begets psychedelic rock, and acid rock / psychedelic rock, that whole thing, you can almost see as a proto heavy metal thing. Well, I guess we've kind of proven it or made that point by including the Cream, Cream, Blue Cheer, Jimi Hendrix in our very early episodes of this thing, in our proto heavy metal episodes. But to me, what happens is two things come out of psychedelic rock. You get prog and you get heavy metal, and they both are birthed very neatly right in that sort of 1970 nexus, right? August 1939, Charlie Christian at 23 gains national exposure in the Benny Goodman Sextet, arriving on that famed platform through the recognition and promotion of John Hammond. Christian is now cited by guitar historians as the first guitar hero, and the guitar that he is heroic with is electric. Part of the accolade is his work in bringing the guitar out from behind the brass, where it had been a struggling, quiet instrument. That's a big part in this too. By the way, and a lot of these concepts come up because we really explored a lot of this when we did those metal evolution episodes, right? A lot of these sort of ideas looking for exploring all this came up then. And one of the subtle, very cool things was the pulling forward of the guitar as a struggling acoustic instrument, being like overrun by louder things like brass and coming forward through electricity. And there you get the birth of, blues, rock and roll, heavy metal in there, right? Usually heard only through the hacking and banging of rhythmic chording. So that's the other thing. Guitar was almost a rhythm instrument, hence the term rhythm guitar, right? Because the only thing that you could hear out of it is basically sounding like brushes, right? Sounding like brushes on a drum set. So the rhythmic strumming of guitar was one way to cut through, kind of thing, right? And rhythm guitar is very important to heavy metal because what's also important to heavy metal? Power chords, right? And power chords is the rhythm end of a heavy metal onslaught. You've got a rhythm guitar player and you've got a lead guitar player, so you've got howling cool leads being played, but the meat and potatoes of heavy metal is the power chords, i.e. the riff sort of thing, right? Riff to me is a word that fits between chords and lead playing, right? So a riff is sort of the same thing as a lick, right? Or a lick could be a short lead part or whatever, or a repeating lead part, which again brings it into the idea of riff, right? Anyways, that's a tangent. 1940, Les Paul, working after hours in the Epiphone factory, creates his prototype electric guitar called the Log. Then I've got a big long treatise here from the CEO of Gibson, who I talked to, Henry, big Polish last name, Juskowitz, something like that, right? But yeah, he explains this whole thing, and it's a really cool treatise about the invention of heavy metal. 1942, at the siege of Stalingrad, it is reported that the besieged Soviets rolled giant loudspeakers to their front line and played Argentinian tangos to their German attackers to keep them on edge through the long winter nights. Again, we had this whole thing about music being scary and warlike that we talked about in the first episode, and it's continuing through this episode. July 1942, Freddie Slack's instrumental Riffette includes an electric guitar solo by T-Bone Walker, a solo that is arguably the first rock and roll guitar solo. Walker is a key influence on Gorey Carter and Chuck Berry. Other contenders around this time include Sister Rosetta Sharp's Strange Things Happen Every Day from 1944, although the track is arguably a brisk blues, and Illinois Jacquette's Blues Part 2. January 9th, 1944, Jimmy Page is born as World War II draws to a close and World War III begins over whether or not Jimmy Page invented heavy metal. 1944, 1979's Apocalypse Now includes a scene featuring the charge of the air cavalry while Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore's helicopter sound system plays The Ride of the Valkyries as they approach a Viet Cong-controlled hamlet. Author on Music in War, Jonathan Pieslak, couldn't find anybody to confirm if this actually happened, but says, strangely, there may be some truth to that scene since it has been reported that near the end of World War II, the Germans sometimes played that song to their soldiers to motivate them to continue to fight. April 14th, 1945, Richard Harold Blackmore is born. Richie Blackmore, Weston-on-Mare, Bristol. Family transitioning to London when Richie was 2, putting Richie at the heart of the metropolis that would be one of the centers for metal making, if not steel production. That would be Birmingham, right? Birmingham and Detroit, right? Well, not steel, but car making, right? April 19th, 1945, Ian Gillan is born, screaming in Hounslow, London. 1946, Hey Ba Ba Ree Bop by Wynonie Harris is yet another proto-rock number. 1946, Gibson introduces the P90 single coil pickup, which would soon make the Les Paul come alive. The double coil humbucker would supplant it in 1957. June 1947, Good Rocking Tonight, later Good Rockin' Tonight by Roy Brown features the word rockin', and in the writing of it, the blues subtly flips over to boogie, something close to rock and roll. In 1973, the song was covered in a bold early metal zone by Montrose, of course, right? December 1st, 1947, Aleister Crowley dies, so heavy metal can be reborn. So there you go. Through some sort of chaos magic feat. 1947 is some strange occult nexus year with Aleister Crowley dying and heavy metal being born, right? And then very shortly after, February 4th, 1948, Vincent Alice Cooper Fernier is born in Allen Park, Michigan. February 19th, 1948, Frank Anthony Tony Iommi is born in Aston, Birmingham. So maybe there's something to this Aleister Crowley thing. March 17th, 1948, the Hells Angels is born in Fontana, California. May 5th, 1948, Bill Ward is born in Aston, Birmingham. September 1948, one of John Lee Hooker's early singles, Boogie Chillin', is issued. The rhythmic choppy structure is similar to, though less electric than, Hooker's Devil's Jump, which Pete Townsend had heard, citing the particular inspiration of seeing Hooker put a microphone inside his guitar, restring the guitar, and then play the song singing into the microphone that is inside the guitar. December 3rd, 1948, John Ozzy Osbourne is born in Aston, Birmingham. 1949, the first Fender Telecaster is issued, although it was known as the Broadcaster. And there we've got an ad in there showing the Fender. What is that other picture of? Well, that's a John Lee Hooker album. So there you go. That's what I mean, this book being timeline with quotes. This is mostly timeline at this point, but usually there's big supporting quotes for everything. Oh yeah, a couple more. 1949, Rock the Joint by Jimmy Preston and his Prestonians is considered by some to be the first rock and roll song. There's so many candidates for that, right? It's mainly piano and sax, but it's quite rock and rollsy with the circular boogie melody more pronounced over previous proto-rock numbers from the 40s. April 49, music historian Robert Palmer considers Gordy Carter's Rock a While, recorded at this time, as candidate for first rock and roll song. Indeed, there is an element of distortion on the guitar, but it sounds like distortion more due to rough recording values. And finally, July 17th, 1949, Terry Geezer Butler is born, like his Black Sabbath bandmates, in the Black Country. And we could say that Geezer invents the heavy metal lyric, right? Through his banks of lyrics, we get many heavy metal themes, all arriving in an onslaught, 2 albums in 1970, on to 71, on to 72, blah, 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 right? So there you go. That is our second episode of Who Invented Heavy Metal. It is called Who Invented Heavy Metal, 1900 to 1950. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to us. We're always trying to get those numbers up. You can join our Patreon situation, and that gets you onto our panels. And you can pick if you want to be on a panel on something. And yeah, we've had lots and lots. We've made lots of friends through the Contrarians Network who have been on panels over the years. So that's a really cool thing. And it's like $3 a month, I think, is the Patreon minimum to get in to this whole situation. So there you go. There's going to be more of these early episodes leading up to our first album, that one that I did, which was, in real time, the first episode that I did. I think we did Jimi Hendrix first, right? Jimi Hendrix and then Cream. But yeah, check out all the other episodes. There's been a bunch of them up already, including the MC5 one, 2 Blue Cheer ones, the Cream, the Hendrix, blah, blah, blah. We've got a few more coming. So there you go. Talk to you later.